Welcome back. We've got some of the main Sunday newspapers here in front of us. I'm joined by my colleague Andrea van Wyk. Thank you for stepping in. Appreciate it. What papers have we got? What stories have caught your eye?
Well, let's take a look at Sunday Sun first. The headline there is, "It's a date!" Zodwa's wedding countdown. So this is about the celebrity Zodwa Wabantu. She's set to make history because her Ben 10, Tobeko Linda, will finally walk her down the aisle to say, "I do." Apparently, the date set is the 27th of July. But also importantly, on the second page of the paper, boots on the ground to fight gang crime. Obviously, that is the
soldiers being deployed.
Absolutely. So there's an article on that today as well, preparing to deploy in a bid to support police efforts. And we would have seen the news stories earlier about how the police have now gathered in expectation of that happening.
Yeah, we saw the videos yesterday, all the troop-carrying vehicles busy driving down the road. A lot of people will be quite happy about that, I'm sure, in those particular areas. I've got the Sunday Times. Exposed. Meet the unemployed Rastafarian whom Kobane says was a major source for her explosive report on Gordon and SARS rogue unit. Let me just read the front couple of paragraphs. An unemployed, dope-smoking Rastafarian has emerged as a key source for Public Protector Busisiwe Mkwabane's explosive report on Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. The expose shows a litany of blunders and missteps in how Mkwabane arrived at her findings and her call for President Cyril Ramaphosa to act against Gordhan, the spearhead of Ramaphosa's bid to clean up state-owned entities at the heart of the state capture project. What do you make of a dope-smoking Rastafarian being the source?
Well, funny enough, the paper spoke to him, and he said that because according to Mkwabane's report, apparently he was part of this so-called rogue unit and he was an agent. But when he was traced, he said, well, no, that's not true. I was never an agent. I was a law interpreter for SARS at some point, but he said, no, sorry, I was never an agent. There's a huge mistake that's been made here.
Yeah, I see here. Manike confirmed he was once a law interpreter at SARS and said he was never an agent of any sort. Quote, he was never part of any rogue unit.
Well, this just once again casts aspersions on the Public Protector's report and the idea that there was a so-called rogue unit within SARS. So we know that she's been receiving a lot of flack for her report, not just from Pravin Gordhan, but from other institutions and lobby groups. But this just once again, it's funny as well, isn't it? A dope-smoking Rastafarian.
The saluting dope-smoking Rastafarian. Let's have a look at the Sunday Independent to contrast. So we have Mkwabane's report, how editor meddled in rogue unit saga. What are we looking at there?
So according to the journalists here, City Press editor Mondli Makanya, when he was the City Press editor, tried to facilitate a secret meeting between advocate Muzi Sikakane, who compiled the Sikakane report into the so-called rogue unit, and then SARS Commissioner Ivan Pillay. This was just before the Sikakane report was supposed to be released. So apparently, they tried to look at this report before it was leaked and before it was then released by SARS.
Jeez. Okay. I want to take us back to the Sunday Times. It's pretty much a second lead on the front page here. Very bad news for our colleagues at the public broadcaster. SABC's plans to cut up to a third of staff. The cash-strapped SABC's turnaround plan includes cutting staff by up to 33% and closing down 5 offices, cutting 19 general manager posts, saving 28.5 million rand a year. The woes at the public broadcaster continue.
Well, yes, and the interesting thing is what's going to be the political reaction, because we previously had the Minister of Communications intervening when the SABC initially announced that it wants to cut staff, and intervened with the board and basically said this is not going to happen. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Will the minister comment again? Will the minister try to intervene? Because like you said, it's extremely bad news for the broadcaster. For example, one of the things that it wants to leave out is SABC Sport. And sport, I mean, there's been a lot of contention with the SABC broadcasting sport, for example, and the rights to broadcast sport. And this just looks like it's another step backwards in that arena.
Sheesh. Yeah, I see here dissolving SABC Sport and incorporating it into television and the radio division. Also, of the 300 independent news contractors, 100 must be cut. This is terrible news for some of our colleagues in this industry. Let's have a look at the City Press. What have we got there?
So this relates to the Department of Arts and Culture. So the headline reads, the 100 million arts funding scandal. So whistleblowers claiming that a Mzansi golden economy funds millions are allocated to artists without checks and balances. And one group, for example, that they mention is Ladysmith Black Mambazo. They were allocated 36 million rand, okay, by the Department of Arts and Culture to teach traditional Zulu song and dance and to make an album with former President Jacob Zuma. Now, the problem is that the department's own rules states that there is a 1 million rand threshold for funding individuals and 2 million for events and tours. And here you've got 36 million over 3 years by the Department of Arts and Culture for Ladysmith Black Mambazo. So just to give the department also right of reply, they're denying that there was anything irregular about this.
Okay. Jacob Zuma's singing career almost.
Well, we're still waiting for that album.
Almost getting off, yeah. I've got the Sunday World. Muvhango's KK busted for extortion. Popular Muvhango actor McDonald Chifiwa Ndao, who plays the character of KK, is languishing in freezing cold police cells after being bussed by the Hawks on Friday. He was nabbed with 2 other men on charges of extortion, corruption, theft, and kidnapping. They impersonated police officers and allegedly tried to extort 100,000 rand bribe from a Gauteng businessman by threatening to arrest him for illegal diamond trading. So not making enough money in the industry he's in.
Well, clearly he can't be such a good actor if he's acting as a police officer didn't fly.
Yes, his impersonation didn't exactly work. That's a very interesting story. I see Mampintsha Babe settle out of court. I've had to speak about this duo before. It's not my forte, I will admit. But I see here, couple withdraws the cases of assault against each other. I don't know if you followed that at all.
Yes, so that's after the mediation that they had, because remember they agreed earlier this year that instead of pursuing criminal charges, they'll go for mediation, and apparently that has been successful. So they are together and they are working on music, and they, like you said, they've withdrawn the charges against each other. A very controversial thing.
Yeah.
Because you know, the video in which Mampintsha hits Babes Wodumo was just so public. I mean, it made international headlines. I saw it on the BBC. So it, you know, now people are asking, okay, was this a publicity stunt, or why are the charges being withdrawn? Because it was such a public thing at the time, and it raises questions about domestic abuse and pursuing charges against a domestic abuser. So, yeah, it raises a lot of questions around that.
Yeah, how flippant they were about the whole thing, and just does it take the fight against domestic abuse back, in a sense, I suppose?
Absolutely. But then there are others that say, again, that it's extremely hard for a woman to leave, and that perhaps is just an indication of that, because they have such a close relationship. I mean, you know, he's a producer, I believe. So they've got a close relationship. Besides their personal relationship, they have that business relationship, and that perhaps that makes it much harder to leave, or much harder for a person to extricate themselves from a situation like that.
Let's go back to the Sunday Independent. I see Jacques Poe, author behind The President's Keepers, is on the front page.
Yes, so this actually relates to the story about how
road
Mondli
unit.
Makanya apparently intervened. So apparently, according to Sunday Independent, author Jacques Poe also tried to unduly influence the city press regarding the so-called rogue unit story, because he was trying to say to them that they must wait, that they must be very careful in the way that they publish the stories, and that they should hold off on publishing any stories about the unit until the Sikakane report came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in light of what we now know, the Sunday Times apologizing for all of their rogue unit stories, perhaps this wasn't the worst thing.
No, probably not. I mean, he was telling them to be careful, and we know now that journalists should have been careful about this.
I see. Well, let's give the viewers a bit of a juxtaposition here between the dope-smoking Rastafarian and the editor then at the City Press, who is said to have meddled in this so-called rogue unit saga. There's something I want to discuss with you quickly. When Zuma goes before Zondo,
Oh, yes,
will he
everybody's
or
looking.
will he not? I've often had that sort of running through my head. I am going to be at the Zondo Commission tomorrow. If we speak generally about the history of Jacob Zuma and his legal affairs, the Stalingrad strategy, using every legal obstacle you can throw in the way to make sure that, despite saying you want your day in court, not to have to testify, do you believe he's actually going to show up, and are we going to hear him testify?
I think he might show up, but
Yeah.
whether he's going to testify is another matter at all. Personally, I mean, if I was him, I probably wouldn't want to testify, right? You don't want to answer questions.
Yep.
So, I mean, he's responding to the Zondo Commission's invitation, if we can call it that, to
Yeah.
appear before them. But, you know, and it's set down for 5 days, Monday to Friday, but I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do Monday to Friday if he refuses to say anything.
Well, you know, his attorney was rather cryptic, saying he will appear.
Yes.
Appear doesn't mean testify.
No, exactly.
So he could also argue that he wants to testify through his legal representative, which there's no precedent for. He did ask for questions up front. Once again, that's not a luxury afforded to any other witness. He's giving indications that he's just not going to make this easy for them.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And Jacob Zuma never makes it easy, does he? You've mentioned the Stalingrad strategy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, his legal representatives try to throw a spanner in the works and
Yeah.
muddy the waters even further when we see him tomorrow.
Yeah.
Just one thing worth mentioning is, for example, that there's going to be extremely tight security around this. We heard that only 200 members of the public will be allowed in, so it's a first-come, first-serve basis. And
Yes.
if you're very keen to see Jacob Zuma testify tomorrow, you might want to queue from early on.
Yes, and 100 seats have been made available for the media, so they're expecting a very large contingent. Andrew and Vivek, my colleague here at ENCA, thank you so much for your time this morning. And that's it for this edition of The Fix. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.